Canada's Mark Carney has appeared with President Trump at the White House.
President Donald Trump slapping a 35% tariff on some Canadian goods.
The supply chain isn't functioning as it normally does.
Midnight in Buffalo, a McDonald's glows like a beacon, but the seats are empty. The fries taste strange. The burgers sit untouched. What was once comfort food for Canadian families now feels like a warning sign. And it isn't just one chain. From Portland to Miami, the icons that shaped American childhoods are being abandoned by their closest neighbor. This isn't about dinner. It's about billions in lost revenue, collapsing small businesses, and a cultural bond snapping in real time. If Canadians are turning away from US brands, how long before the rest of the world follows? Today, we count down 7 American giants losing their grip faster than anyone expected. Number 7, Panda Express. It hits your tongue like a sugar bomb disguised as stir-fry. But for many Canadians, the bitter aftertaste isn't just from artificial flavoring, it's from politics. Once a novelty on road trips, Panda Express has become a symbol of everything wrong with American corporate culture and foreign policy messaging. The timing couldn't be worse. As trade tensions escalated and tariff threats dominated headlines, Canadian consumers began scrutinizing every dollar spent south of the border. Panda Express, with its mass-produced Asian fusion approach, became an easy target for those seeking to support authentic local businesses instead. Food analytics from early 2025 show a 41% drop in Canadian spending at US Panda Express locations, especially in border malls and interstate rest stops. But this isn't just about soggy chow mein and sticky orange chicken, it's about cultural respect and economic sovereignty. Canadian travelers increasingly view chains like Panda Express as emblematic of American corporate arrogance. The food doesn't just lack authenticity, it commodifies Asian culture while contributing nothing to local communities. Steam trays sit too long, noodles clump, and vegetables drown in syrupy sauces that taste more like dessert than dinner. But the real offense is deeper. One Vancouver couple on a road trip to Oregon documented their experience, filming their meal at a Panda Express and titling the video, "Canada Deserves Better Than Corporate Colonialism." The clip went viral overnight with hundreds of commenters sharing stories about choosing local Asian restaurants over American chains. The comments reveal a broader sentiment. "Why give money to corporations that lobby for policies that hurt Canadian workers?" wrote one user. "Every dollar at Panda Express is a vote for the trade war mentality." Canadian Asian communities have been particularly vocal about the cultural appropriation aspect. Food bloggers from Toronto's Chinatown and Vancouver's Richmond district regularly point out how chains like Panda Express perpetuate stereotypes while enriching American corporations at the expense of authentic immigrant-owned restaurants. The contrast with Canada's thriving Asian food scene is stark. Cities like Calgary, Montreal, and Ottawa have exploded with authentic noodle houses, dim sum parlors, and Korean BBQ joints, many owned by families who immigrated to Canada seeking opportunity and respect. These establishments offer real wok flavor, fresh ingredients, and cultural authenticity that Panda Express can't match. Social media amplifies these concerns. Canadian influencers regularly showcase local Asian restaurants while calling out chains that profit from cultural stereotypes. One Montreal food critic called Panda Express the culinary equivalent of diplomatic insensitivity served on a plastic plate. But the political dimension goes beyond cultural issues. Many Canadian consumers see their dining choices as economic votes. Spending money at American chains means supporting corporations that lobby for policies potentially harmful to Canadian interests. Trade disputes over lumber, energy, and agriculture have made economic nationalism fashionable again. The pricing doesn't help either. What used to be an affordable quick meal now costs nearly as much as authentic restaurants without supporting local immigrant communities or contributing to cultural understanding. For modern Canadian diners, Panda Express doesn't represent convenience. It represents a corporate approach to culture and economics that feels increasingly outdated and offensive. But if artificial Chinese food is losing appeal, one iconic American dessert chain is discovering that sweet memories can't overcome political bitterness. Number 6, Dairy Queen. Nostalgia can only take you so far, especially when every Blizzard purchase feels like funding policies that hurt your home country. For Canadians visiting the US, Dairy Queen has crossed the line from childhood treat to political statement, and not the kind they want to make. What used to be a beloved stop for ice cream and burgers now feels like contributing to a system that views Canada as a competitor rather than a neighbor. Melting cones and freezer-burned cakes are just the surface problems. The real issue runs deeper. Insiders close to franchise operations reveal a 35% decline in Canadian spending at U.S. Dairy Queen locations over the last 12 months. While Canadian DQs maintained quality and embraced progressive workplace policies, their American counterparts became symbols of everything Canadians increasingly reject about U.S. corporate culture. The contrast is telling. Canadian Dairy Queens have embraced living wages, environmental sustainability, and community partnerships. Meanwhile, American locations struggle with budget cuts, minimal staffing, and aging equipment that reflects broader corporate priorities focused on profit extraction rather than community investment. A Quebec family's viral TikTok perfectly captured this dynamic, featuring half-melted ice cream, sticky tables, and a manager who shrugged when they complained. But the comments revealed deeper frustrations. "This is what happens when corporations prioritize shareholders over communities," wrote one user. "Our tax dollars shouldn't support this through tourism." The political context matters as trade disputes intensified and rhetoric about Canadian unfair advantages dominated American political discourse. Many Canadians began viewing their consumer choices as diplomatic statements. Why support businesses in a country whose leaders regularly threaten Canadian industries? Canadian families report feeling unwelcome in many U.S. Dairy Queen locations, not because of overt hostility, but because of a general atmosphere of indifference and declining standards. The friendly, family-oriented service that once characterized the brand has been replaced by understaffed locations where teenage employees seem as frustrated as the customers. Environmental consciousness plays a role too. Canadian consumers increasingly prioritize businesses with sustainable practices. U.S. Dairy Queen's reliance on plastic packaging, processed ingredients, and wasteful portion sizes conflicts with values that many Canadians now consider non-negotiable. Local alternatives have flourished as Canadians redirect their spending. Canada's artisanal ice cream scene exploded over the past few years, with small businesses offering organic ingredients, creative flavors, and community-focused business models. These shops often employ fair trade practices and source locally, aligning with Canadian values in ways that corporate chains cannot. The economic nationalism aspect cannot be ignored. Every $28 spent at a U.S. Dairy Queen is money that could support Canadian small businesses, Canadian workers, and Canadian communities. As cross-border relations deteriorated, this calculation became more important to more people. Store cleanliness and service quality issues compound the political problems. When you're already questioning whether to spend money in another country, poor experiences make the decision easy. Sticky floors, broken equipment, and indifferent service become symbols of larger systemic problems. The verdict is clear. Dairy Queen in the U.S. no longer delivers the experience Canadians once cherished. When your brand runs on nostalgia, there's no room for political baggage. And in an era of economic nationalism and cultural awareness, Dairy Queen's American locations feel increasingly out of step with Canadian values. But next up is a steakhouse chain that once promised adventure and now delivers expensive disappointment wrapped in outdated American stereotypes. Number 5, Outback Steakhouse. The irony is thick as the steaks are thin. An Australian-themed restaurant chain owned by American corporations serving overpriced beef to Canadians, increasingly skeptical of U.S. business practices. Outback Steakhouse has become an accidental symbol of everything wrong with American corporate cultural appropriation and economic priorities. Tourism surveys from 2024 showed a 31% drop in planned Canadian visits to Outback locations during U.S. trips. But this isn't just about overcooked ribeyes and oil-soaked bloom and onions. It's about what these chains represent in an era of strained diplomatic relations. Canadian diners increasingly question why they should support American corporations that appropriate other cultures while their own government threatens Canadian industries. The Australian theme feels particularly hollow when you realize the profits flow to American shareholders while real Australian businesses struggle with international competition.
The famous blooming onion has become a metaphor for American excess that many Canadians now find distasteful. It arrives as a greasy, sodium-loaded spectacle that exemplifies the wasteful consumption patterns that drive environmental and health crisis. For environmentally conscious Canadian travelers, ordering one feels like participating in everything they oppose. But the political dimensions run deeper. Many Canadian beef producers have faced challenges from U.S. trade policies and regulatory barriers, paying premium prices for mediocre American beef. While Canadian ranchers struggle with market access, feels like economic masochism. Service quality issues compound these concerns. Undertrained staff and declining standards reflect broader American labor practices that many Canadians find troubling. Low wages, minimal benefits, and high turnover create dining experiences that feel exploitative rather than enjoyable. One Calgary couple's Outback failed TikTok, featuring a $38 steak that looked like it lost a fight with a microwave, sparked discussions about economic sovereignty. Comments focused not just on food quality, but on principle. For this price, I'll support Canadian ranchers instead. The pricing has become particularly offensive as Canadian-U.S. economic relations deteriorated. A meal for two easily exceeds $100. Money that could support local Canadian businesses facing increased competition from subsidized American corporations. Canadian Steakhouse offers superior alternatives that align with contemporary values. Farm-to-table restaurants, Indigenous-owned establishments, and community-focused grills provide better quality while supporting Canadian workers and sustainable practices. Wine lists at Outback reflect broader American insularity. Overpriced domestic options with minimal international selection. Canadian diners accustomed to diverse, reasonably priced wine selections at home find the limited, expensive options another reminder of American corporate short-sightedness. The Australian theme feels increasingly problematic as Canadians become more aware of cultural appropriation issues. Using another nation's culture as restaurant decor while contributing nothing to actual Australian businesses or cultural understanding strikes many as exploitative. Environmental concerns add another layer. Outback supply chains prioritize cost over sustainability, conflicting with Canadian environmental consciousness. Supporting businesses with poor environmental records feels irresponsible to travelers from a country taking climate change seriously. Once a road trip indulgence, Outback has become a symbol of American corporate arrogance and cultural insensitivity. Canadians are choosing alternatives that better reflect their values and support their communities. But if Outback struggles with cultural appropriation, the next chain is drowning in political controversy that even nostalgic biscuits can't overcome. Before we reveal the top 4, I want to hear from you. Have you noticed fewer Canadians in your local restaurants? Or do you think these brands can bounce back? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're finding this breakdown eye-opening, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of America's shifting story. Number 4, Red Lobster. For years, warm, buttery biscuits could excuse almost anything. But when a restaurant chain becomes a casualty of trade wars and corporate mismanagement, even the most legendary bread can't save the reputation. Red Lobster's collapse tells a story about American corporate priorities that Canadian consumers find increasingly repulsive. The bankruptcy filing in early 2025 surprised few Canadians who had watched the chain's decline accelerate alongside deteriorating cross-border relations. A travel behavior study from Ontario found that only 8% of Canadian road trippers stopped at Red Lobster in the past year, down from nearly 30% a decade ago. But this exodus began long before the bankruptcy. Canadian fishing communities have watched American trade policies devastate their industries. While chains like Red Lobster promoted inferior imported seafood over sustainable North American catches, the irony is brutal. Canadian fishers struggle with market access while American restaurants serve frozen seafood that tastes nothing like the fresh catches available north of the border. Those legendary Cheddar Bay biscuits now arrive cold and dense. But the real bitterness comes from knowing that Canadian wheat farmers face barriers to U.S. markets, while American restaurant chains cut costs with inferior ingredients. The cheese that once made the biscuits famous tastes artificial and processed, reflecting corporate priorities that prioritize profit margins over quality. The seafood tells an even darker story. Lobster tails arrive overcooked and rubbery, clearly frozen rather than fresh. But Canadian diners know that their own coastal waters produce superior lobster that often gets exported to American markets at prices that undercut local restaurants. The famous Ultimate Feast has become a symbol of American excess and waste. Portions are enormous, but quality is terrible, reflecting the consumption patterns that drive environmental degradation. Restaurant atmospheres feel stuck in an era when American economic dominance seemed inevitable. Nautical decor that once felt charming now seems like a parody of maritime culture, especially to visitors from actual coastal communities. Service quality reflects broader American labor issues that trouble Canadian visitors. A typical dinner for two approaches $120. Money that could support sustainable Canadian seafood restaurants with superior ingredients and ethical business practices. Canadian seafood restaurants offer superior alternatives that align with contemporary values. Social media reviews reveal Canadian frustration with both food quality and political implications. Comments focus on supporting local fishing communities rather than corporate chains that contribute to industry consolidation and environmental degradation. Still, none of that compares to the next brand. Number 4, Red Lobster. For years, warm, buttery biscuits could excuse almost anything. But when a restaurant chain becomes a casualty of trade wars and corporate mismanagement, even the most legendary bread can't save the reputation. Red Lobster's collapse tells a story about American corporate priorities that Canadian consumers find increasingly repulsive. The bankruptcy filing in early 2025 surprised few Canadians who had watched the chain's decline accelerate alongside deteriorating cross-border relations. A travel behavior study from Ontario found that only 8% of Canadian road trippers stopped at Red Lobster in the past year, down from nearly 30% a decade ago. But this exodus began long before the bankruptcy. Canadian fishing communities have watched American trade policies devastate their industries. While chains like Red Lobster promoted inferior imported seafood over sustainable North American catches, the irony is brutal. Canadian fishers struggle with market access, while American restaurants serve frozen seafood that tastes nothing like the fresh catches available north of the border. Those legendary Cheddar Bay biscuits now arrive cold and dense, but the real bitterness comes from knowing that Canadian wheat farmers face barriers to U.S. markets, while American restaurant chains cut costs with inferior ingredients. The cheese that once made the biscuits famous tastes artificial and processed, reflecting corporate priorities that prioritize profit margins over quality. The seafood tells an even darker story. Lobster tails arrive overcooked and rubbery, clearly frozen rather than fresh. But Canadian diners know that their own coastal waters produce superior lobster that often gets exported to American markets at prices that undercut local restaurants. The famous Ultimate Feast has become a symbol of American excess and waste. Portions are enormous, but quality is terrible, reflecting the consumption patterns that drive environmental degradation. Restaurant atmospheres feel stuck in an era when American economic dominance seemed inevitable. Nautical decor that once felt charming now seems like a parody of maritime culture, especially to visitors from actual coastal communities. The harsh lighting and worn carpeting reflect corporate cost-cutting that prioritizes short-term profits over customer experience. Service quality reflects broader American labor issues that trouble Canadian visitors. Undertrained, overworked staff earning subliving wages create dining experiences that feel exploitative. Many Canadians report feeling uncomfortable supporting businesses with poor labor practices. Pricing has become absurd as the US dollar's strength made American dining expensive for Canadian visitors. A typical dinner for two approaches $120. Money that could support sustainable Canadian seafood restaurants with superior ingredients and ethical business practices. Canadian seafood restaurants offer superior alternatives that align with contemporary values. The endless shrimp promotion exemplifies everything wrong with American consumption culture. Quantity over quality, waste over sustainability, profit over principle. For Canadian diners conscious of overfishing and environmental degradation, the promotion feels morally objectionable. Canadian seafood restaurants offer superior alternatives that align with contemporary values. From West Coast oyster bars serving local catches to East Coast establishments supporting sustainable fishing, Canadian options provide better quality while supporting environmental responsibility. The chain's failure to adapt to changing consumer preferences reflects broader American corporate insularity. While Canadian restaurants embraced sustainability, ethical sourcing, and community partnerships, Red Lobster stuck to outdated business models focused solely on profit extraction. Social media reviews reveal Canadian frustration with both food quality and political implications. Comments focus on supporting local fishing communities rather than corporate chains that contribute to industry consolidation and environmental degradation. Even nostalgia can't overcome political reality. For modern Canadian travelers seeking authentic experiences and ethical consumption, Red Lobster represents everything they oppose about American corporate culture. Still, none of that compares to the next brand. Once trusted by families, now abandoned by parents who've learned about corporate political activities. Number 3, Subway. Eat fresh might be the slogan, But Canadian consumers are increasingly fed up with the stale politics behind America's largest sandwich chain. What was once a convenient road trip stop has become a symbol of corporate hypocrisy and cultural insensitivity that many Canadians refuse to support. The 42% drop in cross-border Canadian sales at U.S. Subway Way franchises reflects more than just rubber-textured bread and processed meats. It represents a fundamental shift in how Canadians view American corporate culture and its impact on their communities. The bread tells the most revealing story. What should be the foundation of every sandwich now feels like a metaphor for American corporate priorities. Artificially enhanced, overly processed, and designed for mass production rather than quality. Canadian visitors consistently report bread that tastes more like cake than a proper sandwich roll, reflecting ingredient standards that would be unacceptable in Canadian franchises. But the political dimensions run deeper than food quality. Many Canadian communities have watched American agricultural policies damage their farming sectors, while chains like Subway promote freshness, using ingredients that often travel thousands of miles from industrial farms. The hypocrisy is stark. American corporations market freshness while supporting agricultural systems that undermine local food security. It represents a fundamental shift in how Canadians view American corporate culture and its impact on their communities. What was once a convenient road trip stop has become a symbol of corporate hypocrisy and cultural insensitivity that many Canadians refuse to support. The 42% drop in cross-border Canadian sales at U.S. Subway Way franchises reflects more than just rubber-textured bread and processed meats. It represents a fundamental shift in how Canadians view American corporate culture and its impact on their communities. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're finding this breakdown eye-opening, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of America's shifting story.
Franchise labor practices have become another source of Canadian concern. Reports of wage theft, poor working conditions, and union-busting activities at American Subway locations conflict with Canadian values around worker rights. Supporting these businesses feels like endorsing labor practices that Canadians have rejected in their own country. One viral moment perfectly captured Canadian frustration when a Calgary student posted side-by-side photos of Subway sandwiches from Alberta versus Detroit. The Canadian version looked fresh, well-assembled, and appetizing. The American version looked like it had been constructed by someone following corporate cost-cutting mandates rather than food safety standards. The contrast revealed systematic differences in franchise standards. While Canadian Subways improved ingredients and presentation, American locations cut corners, downsized portions, and failed health inspections in multiple states during 2024. The divergence reflects different regulatory environments and corporate priorities. Environmental concerns add another layer of Canadian opposition. Subway's packaging waste, industrial ingredient sourcing, and franchise expansion model conflict with Canadian environmental consciousness. Many travelers now choose restaurants with sustainable practices over convenient chains with poor environmental records. Cultural sensitivity issues have also emerged. Subway's marketing often relies on stereotypes about healthy eating that ignore food access issues affecting Indigenous communities and low-income families. Canadian customers increasingly aware of food justice issues find these marketing approaches offensive. The pricing has become particularly insulting as trade tensions escalated. Sandwiches that used to be budget-friendly now cost as much as meals at local restaurants that support Canadian workers and sustainable practices. The famous $5 futon is a distant memory replaced by $15 sandwiches that don't deliver proportional value. Franchise inconsistency reflects broader American corporate management problems. While some locations maintain decent standards, others feel like completely different brands. Canadian travelers report wildly different experiences depending on location, making Subway an unreliable choice that often disappoints. Innovation has stagnated while Canadian sandwich shops have flourished with creative ingredients, sustainable sourcing, and community partnerships. Local alternatives offer superior quality while supporting Canadian workers and environmental responsibility. Service quality issues compound political concerns. Undertrained staff, slow service, and frequent mistakes create negative experiences that reinforce perceptions of American corporate decline. When you're already questioning whether to support American businesses, poor service makes the decision easy. Canadians now refer to U.S. Subway as representing everything wrong with American corporate culture. Exploitation disguised as convenience, profit prioritized over people, and marketing claims that contradict operational reality. Once the go-to for travelers in a hurry, Subway now finds itself buried under political controversy and operational failures that Canadian consumers refuse to overlook. But the next chain didn't just lose Canadians. It became a symbol of American cultural and political tone deafness. Number 2, TGI Fridays. You walk in hoping for festive atmosphere and hearty American fare, but instead you encounter a relic of American corporate culture that feels increasingly alien to Canadian values. TGI Fridays has become more than just an outdated restaurant chain. It's a symbol of American cultural insensitivity and corporate stagnation that Canadian consumers actively avoid. The menu, frozen in time like American foreign policy thinking, reflects a worldview that many Canadians find troubling. Loaded with processed foods, excessive portions, and artificial ingredients, it represents the consumption patterns that drive health and environmental crisis. But the deeper problem is cultural. TGI Fridays embodies an aggressive commercialized approach to hospitality that conflicts with Canadian social values. The forced enthusiasm, manufactured excitement, and corporate-mandated fun feel manipulative rather than genuine. For Canadians accustomed to more authentic, community-focused dining experiences, the atmosphere feels dystopian. Labor practices at many American TGI Fridays locations have drawn Canadian criticism. Reports of wage theft, inadequate benefits, and workplace harassment create ethical dilemmas for Canadian diners who support worker rights. The contrast with Canadian employment standards makes supporting these businesses feel like endorsing exploitation. The famous appetizer platters that once drew crowds now symbolize American waste culture. Loaded potato skins swimming in artificial cheese sauce, buffalo wings sitting under heat lamps, and sampler platters that could feed families represent the overconsumption that drives global environmental problems. Political messaging, while subtle, permeates the brand experience. American flag imagery, patriotic promotions, and corporate partnerships with organizations that many Canadians find objectionable create uncomfortable dining environments. The brand's association with American nationalism feels exclusionary to international visitors. Environmental practices particularly concern Canadian customers. Single-use packaging, industrial food sourcing, and energy-intensive operations conflict with Canadian environmental consciousness. Service quality reflects broader American social problems that trouble Canadian visitors. Undertrained, overworked staff earning sub-living wages create experiences that feel exploitative rather than enjoyable. Pricing has become offensive as economic nationalism gained popularity in Canada. A typical dinner for two exceeds $80. Money that could support Canadian restaurants offering superior food while contributing to local communities and sustainable practices. Cultural appropriation concerns add another layer of opposition. The chain's use of international themes and stereotypes for marketing purposes offends Canadian sensibilities about cultural respect. Innovation stagnation reflects broader American corporate insularity. While Canadian restaurants adapted to changing consumer preferences with healthier options, sustainable practices, and inclusive environments, TGI Fridays remained frozen in outdated business models. The political climate makes these concerns more acute. As diplomatic relations deteriorated and trade disputes escalated, Canadian consumers became more conscious of how their spending supports political systems they oppose. Every dollar at TGI Fridays feels like funding American corporate lobbying against Canadian interests. Canadians are leaving TGI Fridays behind, seeking restaurants that better reflect their values around sustainability, worker rights, cultural sensitivity, and community investment. But if TGI Fridays symbolizes cultural tone deafness, the next chain represents the collapse of an entire system that Canadians once trusted. Number 1, McDonald's USA, the most trusted brand in the world. Global standardization. Decades of diplomatic soft power. But for Canadians in the US, McDonald's has become a symbol of American institutional decline and corporate priorities that prioritize profits over people, communities, and international relationships. Canadian spending at US McDonald's locations dropped 29% in the past 12 months, representing more than just disappointed taste buds. It reflects a fundamental loss of faith in American corporate competence and values that extends far beyond fast food. The contrast between Canadian and American McDonald's operations reveals systematic differences in corporate governance, regulatory oversight, and social responsibility. While McDonald's Canada invested in higher quality ingredients, sustainable practices, and worker welfare, American locations lag behind in every measurable category. This divergence didn't happen accidentally. It reflects different national priorities and regulatory environments. The famous fries tell the story perfectly. Canadian McDonald's uses different oils, preparation methods, and quality standards that result in superior taste and texture. American fries often taste chemically or artificial. Because they are, corporate cost-cutting has compromised ingredient quality in ways that would be illegal in Canada. But the political implications run deeper than food quality. Many Canadian workers have lost jobs to American corporate consolidation and trade policies. Supporting American McDonald's means funding corporate lobbying efforts that often oppose Canadian economic interests. Every Big Mac purchased feels like voting against Canadian workers. Store cleanliness and maintenance issues reflect broader American infrastructure decline. While Canadian locations maintain modern, clean environments, American locations often feel neglected. Broken equipment, dirty facilities, and poor maintenance symbolize the systematic underinvestment that characterizes declining American institutions. Labor practices create ethical dilemmas for Canadian visitors. American McDonald's workers often lack benefits, job security, and living wages that Canadian workers take for granted. Supporting businesses with exploitative labor practices conflicts with Canadian social values. The infamous ice cream machine problems have become a metaphor for American institutional failure. While Canadian locations maintain functional equipment through proper maintenance and corporate accountability, American franchises struggle with broken systems that reflect broader corporate mismanagement. Service quality differences reveal cultural and systemic problems. American locations often feel chaotic, understaffed, and poorly managed compared to their Canadian counterparts. The efficiency that once defined McDonald's has been replaced by dysfunction that mirrors broader American institutional decline. Environmental practices particularly concern Canadian customers. American McDonald's locations lag behind Canadian standards for waste reduction, sustainable sourcing, and energy efficiency. Supporting environmentally irresponsible businesses conflicts with Canadian climate consciousness. One viral TikTok series comparing Canadian and American McDonald's experiences perfectly captured Canadian frustrations. From portion sizes to packaging quality, American locations consistently disappointed. Comments focused not just on food quality, but on what the differences revealed about American corporate priorities. Digital technology gaps symbolize broader American competitiveness problems. Canadian McDonald's offers seamless mobile ordering, payment systems, and customer service technologies that American locations often lack. The technological superiority reflects different approaches to innovation and customer service. Menu innovations that work well in Canada often fail in American implementation. Quality control seems less strict, promotional items disappoint, and limited time offers taste different. The inconsistency reflects corporate management problems that extend throughout American operations. Pricing strategies reveal different economic philosophies. While Canadian McDonald's maintains reasonable value propositions through operational efficiency, American locations often charge similar prices for inferior quality. The pricing feels exploitative rather than competitive. Coffee quality differences highlight supply chain and training disparities. McCafe drinks in Canada are generally well executed with proper equipment and trained staff. American locations often serve burnt, watery, or incorrectly prepared beverages that reflect systematic operational failures. The brand's famous consistency, the promise that McDonald's experiences should be identical worldwide, has collapsed in America. Canadian visitors report wildly different experiences depending on location, making McDonald's an unreliable choice that often disappoints. Cultural sensitivity issues have emerged as American McDonald's marketing relies increasingly on political themes and nationalist messaging that exclude international customers. The aggressive Americanness that once seemed inclusive now feels exclusionary. When the brand that defined American soft power starts symbolizing American decline, it sends a powerful signal about institutional competence and national priorities. Canadians notice these differences and increasingly choose alternatives that better reflect their values. The Golden Arches once represented American innovation, efficiency, and welcome. Now they symbolize corporate dysfunction, environmental irresponsibility, and political tone deafness that drives away America's closest allies. Canadian consumers are voting with their wallets, choosing businesses that support their communities and reflect their values. McDonald's USA has become a cautionary tale about what happens when corporations prioritize short-term profits over long-term relationships. Like, subscribe and comment below if your cross-border food experiences have changed. Because when America's most iconic brands start losing their closest neighbors, it's not just about business. It's about trust, values, and the future of economic relationships. The question isn't just who's replacing these giants, it's whether American corporations can rebuild the trust they've lost. Because in an interconnected world, alienating your neighbors isn't just bad business, it's bad diplomacy. How close are we to the edge? If this video opened your eyes, subscribe, because if America loses its closest neighbor, it's not just a diplomatic failure, it's a generational one.